decimated because of HIV and AIDS, which was the idea of, and is the chronic problem in the so-called gay community, which is the idea of how we pass on the knowledge from generation to generation. And, you know, I was lucky enough, I'm going to be 50 in a week, and I was lucky enough when I moved here to be friends with people who were much older than I was, and so I got a lot of knowledge from the 60s and 70s because of my friendships, but so many of those people died, and I think it's become, what you're saying I find very moving, this idea that there's not just curiosity, but this idea of a responsibility, of the intergenerational responsibility, and the intergenerational responsibility about the example that's set and about the knowledge that can be shared around, you know, I mean, because it hurts on a very personal level, the idea of thinking a young gay person seroconverting because of despair or because of substance abuse issues or because of self-inflicted homophobia, that hurts me actually. Still, it's not something I can look at neutrally. And I'm sure that's true of many. I see peers in the audience shaking their head. I think it's a really powerful thing to hear and encouraging.
Yeah, I think it's related to that vacuum I was created. And so the fact that the conversation's happening is thrilling. And I was wondering what your take, the group's take is on sort of the deregulation of porn, like the things that have happened. Like Santorum didn't happen in the vacuum. Like
right.
It's been happening for years. Like he's been groomed. Like the right has actually adopted a lot of your techniques, or you know, sort of agitprop techniques for their own messages. And then also the kind of like neutering of activism that's happened in some way with like, you know, these glitter bombings or whatever. It's interesting. I don't know if you have any of those thoughts.
I think I also was very moved by what you said. I think that the thing to bear in mind about us is it actually was a war. I think that, you know, the reason we named that gallery in the back war was, it's very hard to explain that. And I think that there's a PTSD that everyone I know has in some version. And in some ways, in the way that after Vietnam, it took about 10 years before people started making movies, Hollywood started addressing it. It's taken us this long to even get to a zone where we could have something to share. But I agree that if there is a legacy, that's the essential part of it, is the ability for, at the time I felt like it was politically retrograde to participate in the neutralization, as you called it, of dissent, which is exactly what happens. This process where, oh, okay, well the art world's doing something about it, and Grand Fury is, you know, and they're showing up here, so everything's going to be okay. We're sort of put in the position of constantly having to bump up against the fact that we are being told to just put our dukes down. And I think that's, at the time I felt it was retrograde to participate in the historicizing of what we did, but now I feel like it's a responsibility to participate in this.
There's one little teeny thing that I think is interesting that you just said, which I pondered a lot, which is just by 1980, all the major Vietnam War narrative films have been made and distributed and nominated. Coming Home is made, Apocalypse Now is made, you know, Platoon is made, they're all made. The Vietnam War, it's not even a decade. And these are huge, huge movies during major actors of the period of time. We still don't even have a single narrative feature film that really, a fictional narrative. Philadelphia. Or we have, you know, parting glances. But in the aftermath, we don't, and we're only now just having the crest of this wave of documentaries like the documentary, you know, We Were Here, or David Francis documentary, or the documentaries that Jim and Sarah have made. I mean, a number of documentaries reflecting on the legacy. And I find that actually, it's one of the, on a personal level. I mean, I also could just say, I mean, as a narrative feature filmmaker, I am only just beginning to think I could possibly be able to actually tell a story and face that period of time. So I know why I myself was not able to make a movie dealing with any of that stuff during the period of time, but I do find it interesting to look back at Vietnam, because it wasn't like that was a big abstracted trauma. People were, their arms were blown off and their lives were shattered. And so anyways, I just think it's interesting about sort of what,
but it was the exotic. It was,
and it didn't involve sexuality and shame in the so it's an illness in the same way that really characterizes what's so different about this crisis.
Thanks.
Yeah.